Welcome to Bliss.
Pokemon. You know it, I know it, even your grandma knows it. Pokemon has become a worldwide phenomenon, spanning across countless games, cards, movies, TV shows, manga, t-shirts, lunchboxes, flashlights, etc. You name it, Pokemon has merchandise of it. Now personally, I love Pokemon, and I've been a lifelong fan ever since I played Fire Red in 2005, when I got my first Game Boy Advance SP, along with a copy of it for my birthday that year. And I also have plenty of fond memories of me and my friends trading cards at the lunch table and playing Heart Gold and Soul Silver in the back of a school bus. And still to this day, I will regularly play the new entries. Ever since its inception, Pokemon had immediately blown up worldwide. So large, in fact, that it was dubbed Pokemania by news outlets in 2002. And unlike many trends, Pokemon refuses to die. Many gamers over the last few years have remarked about how Game Freak has become lazy in terms of their yearly Pokemon game releases. But I mean, who can blame them? Pokemon has become the global highest-selling media franchise of all time, grossing a whopping $88 billion. And hell, one of Game Freak's most controversial releases, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, has sold over 24 million copies since launch, making it the third best-selling of all Pokemon titles ever released. It's no surprise that the mainline video games are the main selling point of the franchise, but it's also no surprise to say that yes, Game Freak is in fact getting more and more lazy it seems, knowing they really don't have to try that hard to sell their games. Now, not too long ago, we got one of Pokemon's most innovative games in early 2022, that being Legends Arceus, which finally broke the trend that most Pokemon games have. And on top of that, we're also getting a new Legends entry called Z and A, great name by the way, Game Freak, real good, sometime in 2025. But what if I told you that there was already a super innovative Pokemon game that came out over 20 years ago and was the first true 3D open world Pokemon game? And what if I also tell you that this game had mechanics and a unique story that haven't been seen in any Pokemon series since? Today, we are going to take a look at one of my absolute favorite Pokemon games of all time. But before we do, I just want to thank you all for watching, and I want to pose a question. What is your most favorite Pokemon game of all time? Please let me know in the comments and let's start a discussion. But without further ado, let's get into the one, the only, the Pokemon Colosseum experience. Pokemon Colosseum was released for the Nintendo Gamecube on November 21st, 2003 in Japan, and later released in 2004 worldwide. It was made not by Game Freak, but instead made by a company called Genius Sonority. Something interesting to point out here is that while Genius Sonority has been relegated mainly to Pokemon shovelware now, back in the day, when this game came out, it was the first video game that they ever made. Take some notes, Game Freak. Anyways, Pokemon Colosseum takes place during the third generation of Pokemon, but it also has Gen 1 and 2 Pokemon sprinkled in there. It also takes place in the Ore region, a region that has only appeared in this game and its sequel XD Gale of Darkness. The Ore region was actually the first ever Pokemon region based on America, specifically being Phoenix, Arizona. And I feel that it's noteworthy to point this out, since most people believe the first ever game to do this was Black and White with the Unova region. The story of Pokemon Colosseum takes a drastically different turn from other games. This time you play as Wes, a former member of Team Snag'em, a group similar to Team Rocket, that's dedicated to stealing other people's Pokemon. How this team steals other Pokemon is by using a machine called the Snag Machine. It's basically a mechanical sleeve that fits over your arm and allows your Pokeballs to capture Pokemon that have already been previously captured. Now, I assume the reason why Wes fled is because he realized that what they were doing is wrong, so before he left Team Snag'em, he stole the Snag Machine and he also blew a hole in their base. Shortly after leaving the team, he meets a girl whose name I'm going to pronounce wrong. It's R-U-I. I'm going to call her Rui. He meets Rui, who has a special ability to see an aura around certain Pokemon. These are called Shadow Pokemon, aka Pokemon that have had their hearts sealed away, and act more like rabid, vicious animals. They will not only attack other Pokemon, but also humans as well. Wes's mission is to capture and purify these Shadow Pokemon. Throughout the game, it's revealed that Team Snag'em actually works for a larger organization called Cypher, and that this organization's goal is to essentially make these Shadow Pokemon and distribute them around the surrounding region via the winners of something called the Pokemon Colosseums, which basically just act like this game's version of gyms, but slightly different. Now, for a Pokemon story premise, this is insanely cool. I mean, we don't play as some kid who's leaving his hometown to collect gym badges. We play as an ex-gang member who already has 2 Pokemon of his own, on a mission to stop his old gang and Cypher, along with conquering this region's Colosseums. It's extremely different to anything we've seen before and since, with the fact that you can steal other people's Pokemon, and the fact that Shadow Pokemon can attack you as well really change things up. This game is, in my opinion, the most innovative Pokemon game ever released. I mean, come on, it takes place in the first American region, with an adult protagonist, new types of Pokemon, and it was the first 3D open-world Pokemon game ever. I mean, I don't think it gets any cooler than that. It's even crazier that this wasn't even made by Game Freak, and instead was made by some brand new developer studio. This game definitely set the bar high, and I think it earned it. You don't just get innovation like this in newer Pokemon games nowadays. And it's even more intriguing that since there's 0 wild Pokemon in this region, even in-game most vendors don't sell Pokeballs at all, saying there's no reason to, which sets up a really cool aspect of putting you in the mindset of an ex-Team Snag'em member. Because at the end of the day, the only way you're ever going to get new Pokemon is if you steal them from other trainers. Albeit they are Shadow Pokemon, but still, it's a really cool concept that is just one example of what could have been done with the Pokemon series if Game Freak simply implemented this level of creativity into their stories. I mean, the closest we ever got to this was in Black and White, where your morality comes into play, asking the question, is it right to make Pokemon battle, and do they even want to? Like I previously stated, I also think it's worth mentioning that it seems like Genius Sonority really went for an almost Wild West vibe with this game. Obviously the region's scenery can convey that, but also the NPCs themselves will tell you that certain places are lawless areas, and that if you stay there, they cannot guarantee your safety. And that's on top of the fact that some areas really do look run down, and it's quite a contrast to what I've come to expect with other Pokemon games. Something about Pokemon Colosseum just really does feel more grounded in reality, and it sets up a more mature tone for this game. And definitely the most mature setting we've ever gotten in a Pokemon game before and since. Now that I've given you a little taste of what the story is all about, I guess we can go ahead and actually dive into some more of this innovation by talking about Pokemon Colosseum's unique gameplay. One of the biggest differences from normal Pokemon games to this one is that there's only one type of battle system, that being double battles. Now, while double battles were introduced in Ruby and Sapphire, This game takes it one step further by only having double battles. And the game's difficulty is no joke either, as it's noticeably harder than most other Pokemon games. I think the major contributing factor to this is the double battles themselves. Something like type advantage plays a much larger role when you have to take into account of not only your own two Pokemon, but the enemy's two Pokemon as well. For example, if you have a Pokemon that uses self-destruct, that's not only going to hurt the enemy team's Pokemon, but it's also going to hurt your other thrown out Pokemon as well. Now there are ways to circumvent this, like if you have one Pokemon that can use Fly or Dig before the attack, it can negate that, but it can still be extremely stressful at times, even more so when you cannot save anytime you want, and instead must go to a PC to be able to actually save the game. Another thing with double battles is the Shadow Pokemon themselves. You know, the main gimmick of the game. They can attack you and your team's Pokemon, along with ignoring your orders completely. And if you use them too much, they basically go into a different state called Hyper Mode. To explain what Hyper Mode is, I'm gonna have to first break down Shadow Pokemon a little bit more, so it'll make more sense. So basically, Shadow Pokemon are described as Pokemon that have had the doors to their hearts closed artificially, meaning they are more angry and unpredictable, being forced to do wrongful acts or things that they just wouldn't normally do. And when these Pokemon become Shadow Pokemon, they basically unlearn all previously known moves, and now only know one move, that being called Shadow Rush, which is basically just Tackle. Now, when a Pokemon uses Shadow Rush, it not only damages the enemy Pokemon, but it also does recoil damage to whichever Pokemon used it. And the more you use a Shadow Pokemon, the more open their hearts will eventually become, and they will gradually learn new moves and become more pure. But when you first catch them, like I said, they can only use one move. And when they use it too much, they basically enter this different state called Hyper Mode. So Hyper Mode is an agitated state, where once your Pokemon enters it, it becomes a gamble on what they will actually do. They could attack the target, attack your other Pokemon, attack you, attack itself, or hell, it might just ignore you entirely and return to its Pokeball. The only way to stop this Hyper Mode is by calling out to your Pokemon during battle, until it calms down basically. But in a nutshell, that's the gamble of using Shadow Pokemon. And it definitely spices up the gameplay and gives you a different Pokemon experience for sure. Another thing with Shadow Pokemon is that there is no wild encounters in this game. The only way you can actually catch other Pokemon is if they are Shadow Pokemon snagged from other trainers. Well, I mean, sometimes you get like a freebie, but for the most part, that's how you'll get new Pokemon. Now, like the title suggests, you're going to be battling in Colosseums from time to time. I mean, you'll battle in normal places too, but that's besides the point. Like I said earlier, the Colosseums are basically this game's version of gyms, and involve you fighting through other trainers and gang members, so you can beat that Colosseum's champion, and then you're rewarded with a Shadow Pokemon. I like it. It's unique feeling and it stands out from the norm, so to speak. When you're not doing that, you're usually just wandering around various towns looking for Shadow Pokemon, or fighting through enemy hideouts while progressing the game's story. Now after you play for a while, you'll unlock the ability to fully purify Shadow Pokemon, and like I said earlier, the more you use them, the more the little beater will change, and eventually their hearts will fully open, and you can return them to their normal state. Besides the basic gameplay, I also want to touch briefly on the graphics. This game has aged extremely well. It looks amazing for a 20-year-old game. I mean, the Pokemon are all properly scaled, and the battle animations look outstanding, fully conveying what you'd expect these moves to be like. At times, it even rivals other 3D Pokemon games, like Scarlet and Violet, or Sword and Shield. But besides that, that's all the main points I can think of talking about for this game. It still plays similar to other Pokemon games at the end of the day. You progress the story, capture and purify Shadow Pokemon, do double battles, beat Colosseums, and explore the Ore region. So I guess with all that being said, we can move on to my final thoughts. Overall, Pokemon Colosseum is an extremely amazing game. It's a different experience entirely from any other Pokemon game. besides its sequel, Gale of Darkness, and it sets a lot of series firsts. Some of these series firsts include the first American region, the first 3D open-world Pokemon game, first Pokemon game to only have double battles, first new variant of Pokemon, first adult protagonist, first game to allow you to catch other trainers' Pokemon, first fully rendered and true to scale Pokemon, such as Warlord, along with proper attack animations. And on top of all of that, it was made by a company that wasn't even fucking Game Freak. It genuinely baffles me that so many people don't even know about this game or its sequel, and part of me wishes that we could get a remaster or a port of it for the Switch, but knowing Game Freak, they would find a way to fuck it up, so I guess it's better that we don't get anything like that for now. Overall, if you haven't tried this game, then I highly recommend that you do. I played it totally legitimately using my personally owned copy, so it's still very accessible to this day, and it definitely holds up. And to be completely honest with you, it's my second favorite Pokemon game of all time, only being topped by Black and White. So with all that being said, if you made it this far in the video, then I want to thank you all for watching, and I guess I'll see you all in the next video. Bliss out.
Thanks for watching.